And now it's my pleasure to introduce Jessica Daylover. Jessica is an educator, a producer, an entertainer, a mystic, and a queer polyamorous mother of 2 young children. Jessica has a bachelor's degree in philosophy and sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, with a certificate in LGBT studies. An entrepreneur of 20 years, Jessica is most well known for her social media platform, Remodeled Love. With over 170,000 followers across all platforms, Jessica's mission is to expand the cultural narrative on love, family, and parenthood. In 2003, Jessica used her platform to successfully raise over $17,000 to launch an app called Nuclear Fusion, whose purpose is to help folks find, build, and sustain their modern village. Thanks for being here, Jessica.
Thank you. It was 2023. The app is just now being built. It's in phase 2. Actually, you can check out nuclearfusionapp.org. I'm going to be helping people reestablish the village, which should have never disappeared anyway. Okay, now, normally I love to be off script for these things, but y'all, I had a week, okay? I had a week, and this talk is so important to me, and I am so honored to be here. I'm going to have my little cards with me today. Before I get started, raise your hand if you think sex for pregnant people who desire it is an important part of maternal mental health. Oh, that is quite the understanding. Okay. Now raise your hand if you believe the phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," is true, and having a solid village is an important part of maternal mental health. Amazing. Okay, all right, one more question. Raise your hand if you think pregnant people should be culturally supported in being romantically and sexually involved with as many people as they want in said village. Oh, amazing. Obviously, all of the cool providers are here. But I'm going to need y'all to talk to your colleagues because the biases are biasing. And non-monogamous pregnant and birthing folks are not having a good time as far as getting the help that we need. Now, before I share with you some of the healthcare horror stories I've heard from non-monogamous pregnant and birthing people, let me share a story with you about how a lack of postpartum village almost killed me, and polyamory saved me. Polyamory is why I'm alive on this stage right now. But first, a little bit about me. I believe, of course, that you should always be critical of your speakers, who's on stage, who's got the microphone. And you should be dissecting all of the wisdom speakers spout through the lenses of the various identities and privileges that we walk with, because what I tell you about non-monogamy and parenthood today would be very different than what somebody with less privileges would tell you. So while I have a lot of important things to say, I want you to examine them through the lenses of my various identities here. Neurodivergent as hell. I'm a full-time content creator. I'm a cis woman, white, demisexual, queer, polyamorous. I present in a legal heterosexual marriage, which gives me a lot of privileges because people do not know that I'm walking around with a very weird family. And that gives me a lot of access to things that less traditionally presenting non-monogamous people have. Most importantly, I am a Sagittarius sun, a Cancer moon, and a Cancer rising. Thank you. I have been with my husband and baby daddy for 14 years. We have been married for 10 years and polyamorous for 10 years as well. Actually, just a few months before we got married, I said, I think I'm polyamorous and I would like to explore that. And it was a bit of a rocky first year because we had no mentors, no professional mental health help. We had really no one to look up to. We had no non-monogamous community at all. He, of course, in that time realized he was also polyamorous, but it was a very rough and very dark year. Before we go any further, I want to get everybody on the same page because I forget that not everybody knows what I'm talking about. So I'm going to give you some definitions. These are definitions that are, kind of accepted across the board, but these were also written specifically by my husband and I in our book, Polyamory and Parenthood, Navigating Non-Monogamy as Parents of Young Children, available on Amazon Kindle and as an ebook. So non-monogamy is an umbrella term that captures all of the fun things that humans do that cross the boundaries of monogamy. This may include swinging, polyamory, don't ask, don't tell agreements, hall passes, group play, etc. It also includes non-sexual but romantic relationships between two people that would otherwise be considered monogamous. And then there's polyamory, which is a form of non-monogamy. So not all non-monogamous people are polyamorous, but all polyamorous people are non-monogamous. It's a form of non-monogamy in which the individual is open to many loves and many styles of love, which may or may not include any combination of romance, sex, and all of the fun ways of relating in between. And let me tell you, there are a lot of fun ways in between. The polyamorous individual is open to, may pursue, and may carry multiple relationships at the same time that would be considered outside of the boundaries of monogamy. Then within polyamory, okay, non-monogamous people, we love our terms. Okay, so there's a style of polyamory called kitchen table polyamory, which is a style of relating among a polycule. And a polycule is a group of folks who are connected to each other in varying degrees, wherein the members of the polycule, even those who are not dating each other, desire to sit around a proverbial kitchen table and spend time together, or they're at least open to it. It denotes a type of interconnectedness and conscious mingling, which is unlike parallel polyamory. Parallel polyamory is a style of polyamory in which, I don't necessarily have a relationship with my partner's other partners. I might not know a lot about them. I don't desire to connect with them. The relationship kind of happens outside of me having to know any of the details, and there is no hierarchy. All forms of polyamory are just equally, beautiful, and sometimes there can be this idea that kitchen table is like peak polyamory, and it's absolutely not. Sorry. Oh, okay. So when I speak to you today, I'm coming from a very kitchen table lens, and it's important to keep that in mind as you come across polyamorous people in your work, that we're not all like this. Now, I had been with my baby daddy for 8 years. We had been polyamorous for 4 by the time that we decided to try to get pregnant. Now, despite being polyamorous and actively dating, neither me nor my husband had a relationship significant enough where somebody felt like a member of our polycule by the time we were really super pregnant and had a baby. So my first journey through pregnancy and postpartum was very mononormative. And none of my providers were really challenged in any way. Also, luckily for me, I had a very progressive and compassionate midwife who at the time knew nothing about non-monogamy or polyamory, but allowed herself to be informed by me and my experience, and has since changed her practice to be very inclusive. So on this journey in 2017, 2018, I did not experience many of the negative effects that a majority of pregnant non-monogamous people have experienced. And most of these people are experiencing harm because we are hiding our non-monogamous identities from our healthcare providers, especially anyone connected to our birth care, anyone on our birth care team, therapists, OBGYNs, medical assistants, nurses, etc. One of the most painful and detrimental things that non-monogamous birthing people experience is the inability to have our full support system at birth. Now, sometimes that includes the literal exclusion of a baby's parents in cases where there are more than 2. And this is especially true in hospital settings, especially with COVID. It's largely outside of the control of providers, but in cases where it's not, or in cases of home births, I really encourage providers to examine how they might create a truly safe and inclusive birthing experience for non-monogamous families. In my survey, very scientific, just online with 0 controls, so keep that in mind, of over 700 of my non-monogamous followers, everything from subtle microaggressions, like providers only addressing one other parent besides the pregnant person in the room. Usually the bio dad, if that was part of the equation, is who providers will address, and they will completely exclude the other parents. To full out just exclusion. You're not a parent, you don't count, you can't be in here, we won't give you any information about the child, you're not on the paperwork, so we can't give you any information. These had traumatic and ongoing negative effects on the mental health of the birthing person in that moment and after, and their entire family structures. Now, here's a picture of my first home birth where I am surrounded by my village. Now, technically, I am not in a sexual or romantic relationship with any of the people in this picture, but people's feelings about this picture change dramatically when they think that I am. The picture doesn't change, but people's feelings do. So if I tell you this is my queer chosen family, it's, oh, look at that. It takes a village. It's so beautiful. But when people think I'm sleeping with all the people in this photo, or even if I'm not sleeping with all the people in this photo, just all of the people in this photo are considered this baby's parent, people get very uncomfortable. And it is because the semiology is pushing them up against the edge of their bias, because we were all born into a mononormative culture, compulsory monogamy. Monogamy is not just taught as the standard, it's taught as the only thing. A lot of times people don't even know there's another option until they're at a conference and someone's telling them about it. Sometimes that happens, not you guys, of course. Present company excluded. So when you're pregnant or in labor, which is arguably the most vulnerable position you can be in, and when somebody on your birth care team says something that's a microaggression or an aggression, this can not only affect your mental health, it can actually change the outcome of your birth, because we know those things are connected. Now, fast forward 2 years later, and I'm pregnant again, still polyamorous, but this time I have a large and rapidly growing online following where I attempt to represent queer and polyamorous pregnant people. And I attempt to educate the culture about the reality of it. And I will tell you right now that a majority of healthcare workers, and to much of your surprise, a majority of the internet does not like seeing a pregnant, polyamorous woman talking openly about her non-monogamous sex life. I was never more criticized for being polyamorous than when I was pregnant. And it was rough. Accusations about how I keep my baby safe, because obviously we all collect STDs as non-monogamous people, that I don't know who the father of my baby is, as if that's even a moral thing. Because I know non-monogamous people who choose not to know. They do that on purpose because everyone present is the baby's parent, regardless of the DNA. And I think that I was never more criticized for being polyamorous than I was pregnant, because a lot of people, uninformed healthcare workers, the internet, believe that polyamory is all about sex, swinging, orgies, sex. And I can tell you, sometimes it is. For a lot of people, sex is a huge part of their non-monogamous journey. And for other people, it's not. I know a lot of asexual and demisexual non-monogamous people. I am one of them. Inside, I want to be a slut. But outside, I am a demisexual, and it is the greatest strain of my life. So I was not having the sex that people thought I was. Now, I want to talk to providers, to non-monogamous pregnant people, about how irrational this is. This is my autism coming through, but I don't like it when things are not rational. So I want to show you that it is not rational to tell non-monogamous pregnant people that they are sinful, that they are harming themselves, that it is dangerous to be a non-monogamous pregnant person. So here are 4 reasons bias against non-monogamous sex for pregnant folks is irrational. Number 1, evidence shows that a healthy and abundant sex life does super beneficial things for pregnant people. We all agreed to that in the first question that I asked. And for pregnancy itself, and it can lead to better labor, birth, and outcomes. Number 2, studies show that though polyamorous people have more partners than monogamous people, their rates of STIs are not higher. The number 1 piece of hate mail that I got when a TikTok went to the wrong side of the algorithm, it's terrible, was that, well, clearly I was at risk of STIs, which, while you're pregnant can do all kinds of damage. And obviously that was going to happen to me because people think they know. But the evidence says that the rates are not higher. Your monogamous pregnant clients have the same risk of STI rate than non-monogamous people. Now, why? That's a whole other talk. Because people are not monogamous, that's why, but moving on. Number 3, low-risk pregnant people, we're not fragile. So when I was out there representing non-monogamous pregnant people on the internet, people were like, whoa, you gotta sit down. You can't be out there dating. You can't be out there having sex. You can with your husband, but other people, it's dangerous. But for low-risk people, it's not. We can work, we can travel, we can have sex, and treating us like we're breakable is harmful, physically and emotionally. It affects our mental health. And number 4, people say the baby comes first, the baby comes first. How dare you do things while you're pregnant that are fun for you? No, the mother comes first, and we know it. And if I made social media content about my healthy sex life with my husband while I was pregnant, I would be applauded as a shining example of sex-positive motherhood. But since people care about the genitals and who I'm interacting with, and if it was more than one genital, suddenly not okay. It's not rational. It is not rational at all. But what in this upside-down world is rational? Y'all, things are flipped inside out, and I am losing my mind. At the end of my pregnancy, I did not want to be touched by my husband, bless his heart. Get off me. My really hot girlfriend, though, I can't explain it. It was spiritual. I'm very woo. And the touch of my girlfriend was like more. And we were having the most incredible sapphic sex right up until the day I went into labor. And my first birth was traumatic. He was asynclitic. He was stuck. Nobody knows how we got him out at home. Nobody does. It would have been a C-section in a hospital, absolutely, and thank God that those resources exist. But this birth was what my midwives call a very rare and sacred butter birth. It was born in a pool of water, came right out, felt just like a poop, as they say. And I credit my relationship with my girlfriend and the sex that we were having for opening up my pelvic floor. Right up until that birth, I was very closed off with sex with men at that time, but with my girlfriend, it opened me up, and I really think it changed the result of that birth, and I'm very grateful for that. Despite her breaking my heart like 2 weeks later, it's fine. In the end, the only thing harmful and disgusting and sinful about being a sexually active, pregnant, polyamorous woman was the hate and discrimination that I received for it. That was the dangerous part. That was the disgusting part. That was the harmful part. Cut to day 1 of my baby's birth. Came into this world in the most gentle, beautiful birth you can imagine, and every day since then has been a nightmare. I might cry. The universe gave us a very medically complex child. Chronic reflux, chronic ear infections, colic, and most importantly, not sleeping, like ever. And this was not the normal newborn stage. Of course, everyone hits you with this, don't worry, mama, it's just a chapter. You'll get through it. About 6 months, they'll start sleeping through the night. The only way to get him to stop crying was to hold him all day long. Velcro baby had to be held. I was hiring people to come over just to hold him because I couldn't do it. I was going crazy. And then at night, there was no way to stop him from crying. Just cried all night long. Like many modern American birthing people, that small village that you have in the 6 weeks right? That honeymoon phase where people are bringing you food and doing your dishes and holding your baby for you, that of course wanes, right? And then you find yourself in the ideal nuclear family, the crux of the American family. This supposed to be having this ideal experience, and I was having anything but the ideal experience. And the chronic stress, plus the sleep deprivation of not knowing what was wrong with our baby or being able to solve it, and the medical neglect, which again, whole other talk. As that wore on, so did my mental health. My husband and I began sleeping in separate bedrooms, and we would rotate who was on the baby that night. Keep in mind, he has a big brother, 3 years older. And so we would try to alternate who was sleeping, but of course, the birthing person, the mama, I didn't sleep on my nights off because I could hear him screaming in the other part of the house. And when my baby screams, my body floods with adrenaline. So bless his heart, while my husband could sleep on his nights off, I was Googling what the hell is wrong with my baby. And you can imagine my mental health started declining. If I had an hour to give you this talk, I would take you on the very heartbreaking, very long journey that was just solved as far as we know what's wrong. Like 2 months ago, he's 3 years old. He has sleep apnea. He has obstructive sleep apnea. And we couldn't get help, and no one would tell us what was wrong. And because he's autistic, he cannot comply with testing. And so we were just left out. No, absolutely no one would intervene. I had to fight for every single piece of intervention. And this is happening to kids all over the world, and it's rapidly rising because our jaws are getting smaller. Again, whole other talk. But I found a Facebook group, and this is how I've gotten all of the resources. It's parents of children with sleep apnea, and the stories you will read in there will break your heart because nobody is helping these birthing people. By year 2, I brought visuals. By year 2, I had to double these bad boys, my postpartum depression and anxiety meds, and I was in an extremely dark place. I tell everything to the world. That's what my platform is. It's basically a diary. I'm a chronic oversharer, a professional oversharer, if you will, and I will never tell a single soul the truth of the dark thoughts that I had at my lowest point. My health deteriorated too. I now have 2 autoimmune diseases from the chronic stress and chronic sleep deprivation, also probably long COVID. And I still consider myself a postpartum mama. He is 3 years old, and I still feel postpartum because my baby came out, and I never got to recover. Because it takes a village to recover a birthing person, and I never got that. So my hormones have never recovered, and I am probably permanently broken. And the only reason, okay, I'm for sure gonna cry. The only reason I am still here today, and this is how polyamory saved me. This is my sister right here. This is my husband's other love of his life. She moved 2,000 miles across the country, quit her job, moved 2,000 miles across the country to move in with us and help us survive this fucking nightmare. When we announced that this was happening to the world, we suffered immense judgment from every direction. We did not tell our healthcare providers for fear of the way that it would affect our care. So his primary care and all of the specialists that we now see, nobody knows. They think that this is just, his aunt, which is, talk about how that affects your mental health, her health. Yeah. So monogamy is so ingrained into the culture that friends, healthcare workers, people on the internet immediately projected their concern, which was ultimately just their bias and their ignorance. What's funny is that I felt like I was dying. I was dying. But none of the people who felt called to criticize us for the formation of our polyamorous family were offering to help us. They offered judgment, but not aid. That's interesting. People felt concerned about the health and safety of our children because we were forming a polyamorous family, but nobody felt concerned about the health and safety of our children with 2 parents who were losing our minds, lost in a system that was failing us at every turn. And though her relationship with our shared partner, my husband, was a huge bonus, obviously, for her move across the country, if you asked her why she did it, she would tell you because village care is a value of hers. That is why she moved in with us. A lot of people who are challenged by polyamory will be like, well, Jess, you don't need polyamory to have a village. You can have a village. Correct. Yes, you don't need polyamory to have a village. But polyamory is what formed our village. And now, 2 years later, my kids have 4 parents, actually, because my partner also moved in with us when we actually lost our low-income housing, and we had no choice but to all form a family. So now my kids have 4 parents. Do you know how common that is for kids to have 4 parents? Except usually there's a little piece of paper involved called a divorce, and then it's wholesome. Then it's wholesome, then it's okay, as long as everyone hates each other, and only 2 kinds of sex are happening between 2 people. My kids have 4 parents, and this is why I am alive. Polyamorous people exist, and we're forming our own unique family structures, and we're getting pregnant, and we're having babies, but we are doing so on edge. We are on edge. In my survey of over 700 non-monogamous followers, a majority said they either hesitate to tell their healthcare providers that they are non-monogamous, or they do not tell them at all. Being afraid to disclose our truth affects our mental health and our physical health. When I met somebody new when I was 3 months pregnant with my first, I went in to be tested because that was our policy at the time. Even if you have just been tested, when you meet somebody new, you both go in for a fresh STI panel, and then you can have sex, still with condoms. Fresh STI panel, still having safer sex with condoms. And when I went in, the medical assistant said, "You were just here." I said, "I know." "Well, I don't understand why you're back. Are you worried about something?" I said, "No, I just have a new partner, and this is our standard practice." The energy in the room changed. And as a hypervigilant person raised in a family where I had to walk on eggshells, my face, I read faces. I'm like, oh God, I think I just affected my care. She said, "What do you mean you have a new partner? You're married and you're pregnant." I no longer felt safe getting tested, which is ironic because that's what I do to keep myself safe. And if you ask that person, I don't even think that they would know that that was offensive because they have not confronted the edge of their bias. As I was approaching the end of my pregnancy with my second, and I was very in love, God bless those queer love stories that just rip your heart out. I, saw the end coming, and I knew that I needed some mental health help. So I found a perinatal mental health specialist. But I spent most of our time explaining non-monogamy. And though she was actually really nice, she never said anything really shitty like a lot of the people I surveyed heard. The sessions felt like a gossip session instead of mental health help. I asked my followers, have you ever had a negative experience, including an experience where you're not quite sure what fell off, but you left feeling uncomfortable with a healthcare provider regarding something around your non-monogamous identity? And 60% said yes. Again, not very scientific survey, right? I had no controls. 700 followers, have you ever had an experience with a healthcare provider where you felt blatantly shamed regarding your non-monogamous identity? And over a third said yes. Have you ever had an experience with a healthcare provider where you had to spend time and energy educating them about non-monogamy? And 40% said yes. The emotional labor to merely educate our providers about our life when we are here to talk about something else. When asked which type of provider it was, the top answers were OBGYNs, gynecologists, primary care practitioners, and mental health practitioners. I'm going to read, I have 9 minutes left. I'm going to read some experiences that were submitted anonymously to me. These are verbatim, I didn't edit, so sorry for errors. My second son's father is not technically my husband, he's my partner's. Even after explaining this, he was denied access to my appointments because he was not my husband. Because I have 2 children from 2 partners, doctor's visits are stressful. It's usually me that takes them to the pediatrician when it's both kids because of the concerns about telling one father information for the child that is not theirs. It's absurd to us because all three of us are the partners, our parents. We do this together, and our children do not differentiate who is their biological father. In the beginning, I moved through several providers till I found one that understood my kink and poly lifestyle. Sometimes there's a lot of overlap there. I had police called on 2 occasions. Once was about domestic abuse because of bruises from rope play, and once because it's illegal to have 2 husbands, and the nurse practitioner felt I needed to have charges pressed. My OBGYN pushed for additional STI testing during an appointment for a yeast infection, even though I had tested the month before with no new partners in the polycule. It felt offensive. This story came across a lot, where once they know about your non-monogamous identity, they force STI testing, which, as we know, is not rational. I'm a Black queer femme, and I'm closeted with physical health care providers because about my non-monogamy, even though I've been practicing my entire adult life. Just telling my providers I'm queer has led to awkward and outright inappropriate interactions, like a gyno telling me about their queer sexual experience while giving me an annual exam. So I am afraid to tell them any more information that would potentially make the provider judge me or mistreat me. This is why we hide our identity from our providers, because at this point, my health and my baby's life depends on us getting care. So I'm out here on the front lines on the internet pushing the cultural narrative. Inside those rooms, I don't push anything. Nope, I'm just a regular person. Please help my baby. When asked, how has bias or prejudice against non-monogamous pregnant or birthing folks by healthcare or birth workers negatively impacted your mental health? I have isolated and hid these parts of myself, which is stressful. Anxiety and depression, my polycule has been together for a decade. Both men were active duty. Since I'm legally married to one of them, our family dynamic was illegal in the military. If we were found out, they could have been kicked out with dishonorable discharge. Busted them down a pay grade, lost health care and benefits. We had to be discreet about our family. I got severe side-eye from nurses after recovering from birth because both men were present. Nurses did the bare minimum and seemed to avoid us. I felt actively shamed by my NP, and she made me dread going to appointments and talking to her, which contributed to my perinatal and postpartum depression. My whole pregnancy was a fight of advocacy work for my family to be seen and respected. We heard everything from too many people in the room to husbands only, which is hilarious because we are all AFAB and none of my partners identify with husband. My firstborn child was often disregarded as my child because she was birthed by my partner, and our son not recognized as theirs for the same reason. I did not experience the birth I wanted. I have lots of trauma to go through in that regard still. I was forced to spend money I did not have on a doula who was queer and monogamous so that I could be understood. The trauma of what it took to receive my abortion care is still with me to this day. I've done a lot of work to try to process and move through it the best I can, but having to repeatedly re-traumatize myself to explain to people that just didn't have a grasp on non-monogamy took a toll. To this day, I am fearful of new providers because of all the times I felt uncomfortable in healthcare settings as a non-monogamous person. And finally, bias and prejudice against non-monogamous pregnant and birthing folks caused me a stress at a time in my life I was extremely vulnerable. Having to constantly figure out how to present, masking, not being able to be with all my partners in the way that I needed had been extremely detrimental to my mental health. When all systems of the dominant culture are not inclusive of your identity, it is extremely alienating, isolating, depressing, and anxiety-inducing. Non-monogamous people, with all of this stress happening in the birth space, we are going to therapists. And we are being told that non-monogamy is clearly the source of all of our problems. That we must just engaging in risky behavior. We must be addicted. We must like the drama, because polyamory is the source of the drama. That polyamory is the reason that we have this birth trauma. We preach to mothers and birthing folks it takes a village to raise a child. We also know it takes a village to heal and repair someone who has just given birth. We know this to be true anecdotally, and by evidence. I am living proof myself. So if we stand behind the reality it takes a village, then we must support non-monogamous birthing people in forming the villages that feel most authentic to them. That means healthcare workers must educate themselves, do the work to unbias themselves, and become advocates for systemic change. The problem is that non-monogamy and polyamory tends to trigger even the most progressive providers. Being polyaffirming means that you don't just have to educate yourself on how to be a safe and inclusive provider for non-monogamous folks. That means understanding how non-monogamy works, learning all of our silly terms. It also means that you are required to do the internal work that triggers you, your personal triggers that come up against non-monogamy. You must do your internal work and unpack the belief systems that make you subconsciously want to invalidate the non-monogamous experience. Thank you.